Star Trek Prodigy, Escape Route, Chapter 7. An hour later, the former crew of the Protostar, minus Rocktalk and Murph, had been swept away by Yuchiri shortly after Rocktalk left the pod core, were sitting on the scaffolding of an old starship construction frame, watching as a group of Chikara outfitted their shuttle with its new warp engine. "Jankum would have been able to help," he grumbled, his arms crossed over his chest. He was still stewing after his attempts to help dismantle the current shuttle engine had been shut down by the Chikara, who hissed and chittered at him until he'd finally let them alone. "Who knows what they're doing to the shuttlecraft?" "We're watching them," Zero said blandly. "I don't know what they could possibly do." Jankum huffed, scowling down at the Chikara scurrying around the back of the shuttle. The Chikara had thrown up an atmosphere dome around the shuttle, their motions blurred by the energy field. It looked, though, like one Chikara was taking the old engine apart piece by piece, while another put it back together on a big anti-gravity wagon. "Are we sure this is a good idea?" Gwyn said, squinting down at the atmosphere dome. "Of course it is," Dal said. "Now we won't be stuck on the shuttle for another month." No one responded to this, and even Dal wasn't entirely sure he believed it. Not that he could say why not exactly. It was true that he didn't particularly want to go to Earth, but it wasn't like they had any choice. They were expected, and it had been pretty miserable to be crammed together on the shuttle, everyone in that one cramped space without any private quarters or secret nooks like they had had aboard the Protostar. And Murph would be happier here, eating random objects to his heart's content. It was what Murph did. Honestly, they'd been lucky he hadn't eaten up the shuttle on their trip over. Not that Murph ever ate anything really important, but still. He'd clearly missed being able to eat as he pleased, given how badly he'd wanted them to land on this big trash ball anyway. "Do you think Rocktalk is okay?" Zero asked suddenly, turning toward the others. "Perhaps we should call her comm badge." "She's fine," Gwyn said. "She wants to be left alone. We can respect her privacy." "What was her deal, anyway?" Jankum asked. "Why'd she stomp out of there like that?" "I think she was upset about Murph," Gwyn said. "She was the one who told him to stay!" Jankum let out a loud, piercing laugh that sounded harsh through the suit's comm systems. "She could still be upset," Gwyn shot back. "She and Murph are so close. She's going to miss him. I'm going to miss him." Jankum shrugged. "He doesn't really do much." "Murph does plenty," cried Zero. "How could you say that?" "He ate half the stuff on the Protostar," Jankum responded. "He never ate anything that important," Zero said. "It's not like he ate anything on the shuttle." "Not that important. Yeah, right," Jankum gasped. "Remember when he ate my box of repair tools? Jankum had spent months pulling those pieces together, then poof, all gone." "He can't help it," Zero said rather defensively. "You don't know that," Jankum countered. "I don't know why you're being so mean about Murph," Gwyn snapped. "He's our friend." "He's an eating machine," Jankum snapped back. "He is not," cried Gwyn. Over the edge of the scaffolding, Dal rubbed at his forehead, his eyes closed. The bickering of the other three was setting his nerves on edge. He felt like he'd listened to nothing but bickering since they'd lost the Protostar and wound up on that miserable little shuttle. Looked so tiny from up here, like a toy. Dal watched as the Chikara removed the last of the shuttle's original engine. Or the soundtrack of Jankum and Gwyn's bickering growing louder and angrier on the comms. "You are so ungrateful," Gwyn was practically shouting now. "You think we like having to smell that slop you cook up in the replicator?" "Slop!" cried Jankum. "Slop? Do not tell Jankum that you're talking about his delicious Tellarite stew." "That is absolutely what I'm talking about," Gwyn snapped back. "Enough!" The word erupted out of Dal before he could stop himself. He dropped his hand and looked over at Gwyn, Jankum, and Zero. All three of them glared back at him. "I'm so sick of your constant fighting," Dal snapped. "It's been nonstop. No wonder Rocktalk went off on her own." He shook his head. "And no wonder Murph wants to stay on this big ball of trash instead of going back to Earth with us." For a moment, the others just stared back at Dal. Then Gwyn said, "What are you getting at exactly?" "Nothing." Dal swung his legs and leaped off the scaffolding, landing in a pile of some shimmery dust that puffed out around him and then vanished. "I'm just saying, the bickering is annoying." "Maybe," Quinn said coldly. "You just need to spend some time alone, like Rock Talk." "Maybe we all should," he shot back, before stomping away from the scaffolding and his three friends, all of whom didn't exactly feel like friends in this moment. He walked past the atmosphere dome, where the Chikara were leading the shuttle with the new high warp engine. But Dal didn't want to think about that shuttle. He definitely didn't want to think about going to Earth. So he walked. He trudged away from the shuttle until the sound of the Chikara's work faded into nothingness, and he was alone among the endless drifts of trash. "This is more like it," he muttered to himself, crawling up the side of an Andorian ship that seemed to have been split in half. The sky was awash in the pink light of the nearby gas giant, which he could see just starting to peek over the horizon. It reminded him of the time when he lived with Nandi, the Ferengi woman who took him under her wing, the time before she sold him to the diviner, who forced him to work in the mines. He and Nandi had flown everywhere, seen all kinds of planets, all kinds of skies. Dal swung himself through the shattered window of the ship, landing deftly in what looked like some kind of medical bay. The beds were all in a pile in the corner, and the ceiling had been stripped, useless wires dangling like vines. Dal picked his way through, smiling a little to himself. Nandi's ship had felt a little like this one, a bit run down, a bit dangerous. The protostar was nice and all, but it had always been a bit too polished for Dal's liking, if he was going to be honest. Too shiny, too clean. And he had to have a whole crew to fly it. It wasn't like Nandi's ship. She used to leave him alone when she was off on her various trading missions.
"This ship is your responsibility," she told him, patting him on the head. "Don't let anyone steal it."
And he hadn't. Just a little kid, and he'd watched that ship all by himself. Dal brushed aside the dangling wires, trying to find an exit out of the sick bay so he could explore the rest of the ship. But then his foot kicked something and sent it sailing above the floor. When it bumped up against the far wall, it lit up green, astonishingly bright in the dim shadows of the empty ship. That was when Dal got a closer look at it. "A rando robot!" he cried, scooping it up in both hands. "I haven't seen one of these in forever." Not since he left Nandi's ship, anyway. He'd had one that she'd given him, a little round robot that could be programmed to turn into all different types of toys. Dal had spent hours poring over his rando robot, writing in code that would tell the small metal sphere to unfold into a model starship, or an electronic targ, or an anti-gravity ball that he'd send careering around Nandi's ship. "Every rando robot is different," Nandi had told him when she gave it to him, her eyes sparkling. "So make yours the best one of all, of all, of all, of all." This rando robot was dinged up, though. Still, when Dal pressed the activate button, the robot vibrated and then immediately unfurled into a little Andorian doll with big blinking eyes. A second later, he heard a quiet beep as the rando robot connected to his suit's comm system. "Hello," it said, although the voice was distorted, and it echoed eerily from the helmet speaker.
"Do you want to play?"
Dal smiled. He'd reprogrammed his own rando robot into a doll similar to this one, although his had been a Klingon warrior, not a little Andorian doll. It had barked 5 Klingon phrases whenever he pressed into its belly, and he'd had to ask the ship computer to translate them. "Be brave and live with honor," was one. "Concentrate on the enemy," had been another. He practiced saying each phrase out loud so that whenever Nandi was away, which was an awful lot, he could say them back to his doll and pretend they were speaking together in Klingon. He'd always thought of that Klingon doll, and the rando robot in general, as his first real friend. The memory had been a happy one for him, shouting in Klingon in the empty ship, his rando robot shouting back. But right now, standing in a decaying old Andorian starship on a floating ball of trash, Dal felt a sudden, piercing sadness that cut straight through his chest, because he'd spent more time with that rando robot than he ever had with Nandi. Even when he got tired of the Klingon warrior, the rando robot itself had always been there for him. It had never occurred to Dal before or now that he'd preferred to program the robot into toys that would speak to him. Even when he made the robot into a Romulan warbird, he ensured that it had a miniature ship's computer that would speak to him. "Red alert,"
Enemies approaching.
All he wanted was to hear a voice in Andy's empty ship. All he'd wanted, he realized now, was a friend, a real one. Dal pressed the belly of the Andorian doll. Her eyes blinked and her antenna swiveled back and forth.
"Can we be friends?"
the doll asked in his eerie, mechanized voice. Dal sighed. "You're just a doll," he muttered. "You're not even one that I programmed." Still, he pressed the belly again.
"Let's pick out our clothes for the day."
Dal sighed and pressed the activate button so the Andorian doll would collapse back into the Rando robot's main form, a dinged-up metal sphere. He turned it around in his hands, looking at all the scuff marks and dents. This had been his first friend, he realized. Not a Klingon warrior, not a Romulan warbird, a metal sphere that he could shape into whatever he wanted. An object. A toy. Frustrated, Dal flung the Rando robot at the wall. It bounced off and then drifted lazily through the air, vanishing into the forest of fallen wires. And Dal felt nothing, watching it disappear. It wasn't like how he felt when they decided that Murph wouldn't come with them to Earth, or when he heard Gwyn and Zero and Jankum bickering back and forth, or when he watched Rock Talk slam out of the Chikaran meeting room. That had hurt, watching them leave and listening to them fight. Dal had a sense of everything coming unraveled. He thought it was because he was scared of what waited for him on Earth. But he realized now that it was his fear of losing his friends. His real friends. The friends he'd longed for aboard Nandy's ship every time he spoke in stilted Klingon to a toy. He'd finally found them, after years of loneliness. And he wasn't about to abandon one of them now. Dal darted back to the window and scrambled out of the ship, back into the pink light of the trash pile. "We're not leaving you here, Murph," he said softly. Then he leaped to the ground and took off running. Dal barreled across the expanse of garbage until he was able to see the shuttle glinting in the pink light. Gwyn, Zero, and Jankum were no longer perched on the old scaffolding, which made Dal's heart squeeze in his chest. But as he picked his way up a crest of melted plastic, he saw that the atmosphere dome was gone, and Jankum was banging on the side of the shuttle with his multi-mit. Hitting equipment until it worked was Jankum's primary method of repair, and seeing it now made Dal break into a hearty laugh. How could he ever think he could live without any of his friends? "Jankum!" Dal shouted, sliding down onto looser pieces of plastic. All the trash shifting and rolling under his feet. "Jankum, do you have the tricorder?" Jankum looked over at him, fist lifted. "Tricorder? Yeah, we need to find out where Murph is." "But Murph is staying here." Jankum banged on the shuttle again, then nodded in satisfaction. "Jankum is just making sure the new engine's in there properly," he explained. "Is it?" Dal asked. "Sure is. Shuttle's ready to go when you are." "Perfect," Dal said. "We're going to need it to get Murph back." Jankum shook his head. "You still haven't explained that. Murph wants to stay here." "That's the thing," Dal said. "I'm not sure he does." Jankum frowned, considering Dal's words. He supposed it was possible. It wasn't like any of them knew what Murph was thinking. But even if he wanted to ask Dal for an explanation, it was too late, because Dal had already turned away from him and slapped his comm badge. "Gwyn, where are you?" Dal asked. It took only a few seconds for her to reply. "Dal, is that you?" "Yeah, I'm at the shuttle. Where are you?" Jankum nudged Dal's shuttle. "Jankum could have told you that Gwyn and Zero are inside." Dal looked over at him and shrugged sheepishly, just as the shuttle door slid open and Gwyn stepped out. "Dal, are you ready to go?" Zero zipped up behind her. "We were worried," they said, "when you wandered off like that." Dal waved his hand dismissively. "I'm fine," he said, "and I'm ready to go. But first we need to get Rock Talk and Murph." "Murph?" asked Gwyn. "But he's staying here. The new engine—" "Forget the new engine," Dal said. "The Chikara can have it back for all I care. What's important is that we don't leave Murph stranded here. He belongs with us." Dal bounded between Gwyn and Zero, ducking into the shuttle. "Feels familiar," he thought. "Feels like coming home." "We're not exactly leaving him stranded," Zero said, zipping up alongside Dal. "He's being welcomed into Chikaran society, and—" "Yeah, but he's not a Chikara," Dal said. "He's one of us. He's our family. And I don't leave family behind." Dal half expected Zero or Gwyn to protest, but Neither one did. Instead, they only glanced at each other. Gwen gave Zero the faintest hint of a smile. "I didn't know we were family," she said. "Of course we are." And then Dal tapped his comm badge and said, "Rock Talk, are you out there?" Silence. Dal sighed. "Rock? I hope you still have your badge. I hope you're hearing this." He paused, anxious for an answer. By this point, Jankum had stepped onto the shuttle, too. "Where's the tricorder?" Dal asked. "Somebody scan for Rock." "On it," Gwen said, darting into the back of the shuttle. Dal tapped his comm badge again. "Rock, I know you're probably still upset." He took a deep breath, closed his eyes. "And you have every right to be." Dal's eyes fluttered open, and he saw that the other three were watching him. Gwen had pulled out their sole tricorder. "Look for her," Dal said. "What do you think I'm doing?" Gwen squinted down at the tricorder. "Ugh, something's interfering with the signal." "Keep talking to her," Zero said. "I bet she's listening." Dal wasn't so sure, although he hoped Zero was right. He tapped his comm badge again. "Rock, listen, we're not just a ship's crew, okay? We're friends. We're family, including Murph." Dal swallowed. "And I'm not leaving him here. We're going to fly the ship to the Chikaran pod and give them back their stupid warp-capable engine and get Murph, and I want you here when we do." Suddenly, Gwen gave a shout over the suit's comm system. "Got her," she whispered. "She's close." She fiddled with the tricorder, and then it connected in Dal's suit, too. He could hear it beeping steadily. "Assuming her badge is still on her," Jankum said. "It is," Zero said. "She wouldn't throw it away." "Then why isn't she responding?" Jankum asked. Zero wobbled a little. "I don't—" "Rock Talk, please." Dal squeezed his hand into his fist, his heart nearly in his throat. "I'm not going to Earth without you and Murph. Everything we have to face—" He looked up at them, at the others, Gwen and Zero and Jankum, and fixed his gaze on them as he spoke. "We face together." Gwen smiled, the tricorder beeping through the comm systems of all the suits. Zero's color plate flashed. Even Jankum gave Dal a huge, toothy grin. And then Rocktalk's voice trickled through the comm badge. "Are you really going to get Murph?" Dal let out a long breath of relief. "Yes," he cried. "We're going to get him right now. The tricorder says you're close." "I can see the shuttle." Rocktalk's voice sounded small and distant on the comm badge. "I'll meet you." Dal gestured to the others and then bounded out of the shuttlecraft. But none of them had to go far. Rocktalk was standing on the crest of melted plastic, the light of the gas giant streaming around her. She lifted her hand in greeting. "Did you mean it?" she called out to them. "About rescuing Murph?" "Every word," Dal grinned. "Get in. Let's give the Chikara back their engine." Up on the crest, Rocktalk smiled, and for the first time since she'd stalked out of the Chikaran pod, she actually felt like smiling. Seeing the crew there waiting for her made her heart swell up so big she thought it might burst out of her chest. All that was missing was Murph, and they were going to go get him. So she jogged down the crest of plastic, her arms out on either side to keep her balance. When the melted mass turned loose under her feet, she went careening this way and that. Just as she was about to reach the shuttle, she felt herself tipping sideways, only to be caught by Zero, who'd zipped up alongside her. Their containment suit was strong enough to hold her upright. "I've got you," Zero said. "Don't worry." "Thanks," she whispered. Together, she and Zero made it to the shuttle and followed the others inside. Already, Rocktalk felt better than she had when she was out in the trash alone, and she knew why. It was because they weren't going to leave Murph after all. "I can't believe I told him to stay," she thought as she settled into her seat. Dal was taking the shuttle controls, Jankum in the co-pilot spot. Zero and Gwen settled down on either side of her. "I'm so glad we're not leaving him," Rocktalk whispered. "So am I," Gwen said. "We never should have even considered it." "Everyone ready to go?" Dal called out, his hand on the controls. His question was met with a chorus of cheers. Dal flashed everyone a big bright grin, then switched on the engine. The shuttlecraft flared to life, a familiar roar rolling through the walls. Dal pulled back on the controls, lifting the shuttle up off the garbage, and then everything on the dash turned red.
What?
Dal whipped his head around and looked over to Jankum in confusion. Then the alarm began blaring, and the computer's voice trilled out, "Danger. Engine line damaged. Danger. Danger."
This can't be right. Jankum did the hit test.
"It's the engine," Dal gasped. "The new one. It's defect." And that's when a loud boom ricocheted through the cabin, and the shuttle plunged down, burying them in garbage. Chapter 8. Dal blinked, his eyes watering from the thick smoke blooming through the shuttle. It took him a moment to register what he was seeing through the window. Trash, trash, and more trash. They were half buried in the trash. "Everyone okay?" Dal stood, still slightly discombobulated. Beside him, Jankum shook his head and let out a loud groan.
"Jankum did the hit test," he wailed. "Everything should have been fine."
So Jankum was okay. Dal squinted, wafting the smoke away with one hand. "I'm fine." Zero's voice drifted up through the murk. Although all Dal could see of them were the colors flashing from their containment suit. "Rock talk, Gwyn?" "All good here." Gwyn stepped through the smoke, her heirloom already twisted into a spear. "What happened?" "I'm fine," said Rock Talk. There was a loud rumbling groan, and a triangle of pink light spilled into the shuttle. "Just trying to get the door open." Another clank, and the triangle of light widened. The smoke finally started to clear, revealing Rock Talk as she tried to manually pry the door open. "The explosion killed all of our power," she said. "Good thing we all kept our suits on. What was that? What happened?" "The engine," Dal said. "I'm sure of it."
"You think it was a Chikara?"
Jankum bounded over to the door, whipping an emergency power pack from his multi-mitt.
"Here, Rock, let Jankum help."
"Who else could it be?" Dal crossed his arms, scowling. "They tricked us. They were never going to let us leave." "But why?" Rock Talk said. "They didn't care about us." Jankum pressed the power pack to the door's controls. The controls flared to life, although nothing else on the ship did, and the door slid open. Trash poured across the floor, sliding like rocks in an avalanche, but since the shuttle was only halfway buried, there was plenty of space for the crew to crawl out. "I don't know," Dal said grimly, his thoughts whirring. The Chikara had clearly installed a faulty engine. Dal couldn't think of what else the problem could be. They must have planned this from the beginning. They certainly couldn't have known about his plan to rescue Murph. Jankum was already scrambling over the trash, grumbling about the hit test. Rock Talk and Zero followed. Dal turned to Gwyn, whose heirloom was still in the shape of a sphere. A spear. "How are we going to get off this place?" Dal muttered to her. "I don't know," she said. She crawled up the trash. Dal glanced around the shuttle. Now that the smoke had mostly cleared, he could see that there wasn't any damage to the interior. The explosion might have stranded them here, but at least it hadn't destroyed their entire shuttle. He clambered up the trash pile, pushing himself up to the surface. The shuttle was face down in the garbage, its rear end sticking up in the air. Jankum had already pried open the engine covering, and a trail of thick black smoke flooded out. "The new engine's destroyed," Rock Talk said to Dal.
"Good news is there's not much damage to the ship itself."
Jankum pointed into the engine compartment, and Dal peered inside. He could see where the engine had failed. There was a still smoking hole in its center. The rest of it, though, seemed solid. "The connection ports?" Dal said. "How are they?"
"Jankum's checking now."
The tricorder had made its way to Jankum's hand, and he scanned the compartment.
"Oh, thank the stars. They look good. Just the engine that's messed up."
"It's so targeted," Rock Talk said. "It had to be on purpose."
"Looks like the engine core was designed to overheat," said Jankum. "But almost instantly, as soon as it was switched on."
Dal sighed, shoulders sagging. Just as he suspected. The Chikara had absolutely done it on purpose. But then Dal straightened up, remembering the shuttle's original engine carefully reassembled by the Chikaran engineers. He grinned widely at the others. "We're going to the pod," he said. "We're going to get Murph, and then we're going to get our original engine. They saved it, remember?" "Yeah," Gwyn said. "But how easy will it be to replace?"
Pretty easy. Jankum still has what he needs to fix a broken coil. That'll only take a few minutes.
Jankum kicked at the failed warp drive engine.
Then, once we have this thing taken out, Jankum can make the swap.
He broke into a toothy smile.
The Chikara took the whole engine apart to get it out. But Jankum knows a way to get it in faster than that. No disassembly required.
Perfect. Dal nodded and looked at the others. It's time to raid the pod.
I'm afraid you won't be raiding anything.
Dal whirled around and then froze. Yuichiri stood a few paces away, his expression dark. But it wasn't Yuichiri's expression that froze Dal in place. It was the fact that he was flanked by Chikara wearing mismatched metal-plated armor, all of them carrying an assortment of weapons. As they approached, Yuichiri threw down an atmosphere sphere, the dome rippling out to encompass both the Chikara and the Protostar crew. Dal tensed, suddenly wishing they'd managed to bring a phaser with him on the shuttle.
I see you tried out your new engine,
Yuichiri said. You tricked us, Dal shouted. Gwyn stepped beside him, her heirloom spear glinting. More specifically, you destroyed our shuttlecraft, she said coldly, and you kidnapped our friend.
Kidnapped?
Yuichiri let out a disbelieving laugh.
We asked him to stay. You all encouraged him to stay.
When Rocktalk heard this, she stiffened, suddenly struck by a swell of sorrow. And we were wrong, she snapped, pushing forward. The Chikara shifted, raising their weapons, but she didn't let it frighten her. We never should have done that, especially since you lied. You were never going to let us leave. Yuichiri sighed and gestured at the others, who lowered their phasers.
Actually, we were, he said glumly. But as we were getting everything ready with the new engine, Murph was following us around, and he started whining and whimpering. It was clear he was upset that you'd left him behind. And Mkarja, he straightened his shoulders, standing up a little taller, she was worried that you might have tricked us, that you were going to come back for Murph after you got your engine. So we programmed it to destruct.
We were going to come back for Murph, Dal said sharply, but we were going to give you the engine back too. We can't just leave our friend here.
See?
Yuichiri's eyes flashed.
We can't have that. We need Murph.
So do we, Rocktalk cried. He's our family.
Well then, this is the best solution for everyone, isn't it?
Yuichiri smiled brightly.
You get to stay with Murph, and we'll still be able to have him take care of our hazardous materials.
No, Dal said. We're going to Earth and we're taking Murph with us. Yuichiri sighed.
That's something I simply cannot let happen.
He gestured at the guards again, and this time they swarmed around the crew, weapons lifted. No! Gwyn leaped to the forefront, her heirloom rebraiding itself to become a thin, interwoven shield. Huddle behind me, she shouted at the others. One of the Chikaran guards fired his phaser. The beam hit the shield and sent energy shuddering up Gwyn's arm, but she held her ground. The shield wasn't big enough to protect all of them. She knew that, but she was going to try. Do not fire on my friends! Suddenly, Zero soared over Gwyn's head, the arms of their containment suit flailing wildly. The guards lifted their weapons, phaser fire streaming around Zero and absorbing into the atmosphere dome. The bolts that did hit Zero were, fortunately, deflected by their containment suit and went raining down into the garbage where they sizzled in smoke.
Enough! Cried Yuichiri. Hold fire!
The guards did as asked, and Zero dropped down beside Gwyn. The two of them braced for another fight.
I don't want to hurt you, Yuichiri snapped. No one wants that. We just can't risk you leaving with Murph.
He strode forward, pushing past the guards. Gwyn kept her shield hoisted, but Dal stepped around it, walking up to meet Yuichiri halfway. You can't keep us here, Dal said, his hands on his hips.
It seems we already have.
Yuichiri's eyes glittered.
Your shuttle's engine is destroyed.
Not the original one, Dal thought, although he didn't say anything.
We want to invite you to live with us, Yuichiri continued. Surely Murph would be happy to have such loyal friends at his side.
He grinned, his sharp little teeth gleaming in the light.
We just want to take precautions, make sure you aren't going to try any more funny business.
His eyes narrowed, and his tail twitched nervously behind him.
So why don't you just come with us back to the pod? We'll keep you there for a little while. When we feel it's safe.
Keep us there, asked Zero. You mean take us prisoner?
Yuichiri sighed. Not prisoners, not exactly. But our rooms are going to be locked, aren't they? Gwen asked. Only until we know for certain you won't try to escape, Yuichiri protested. The sooner you agree to live here, the sooner you'll have your freedom back. Behind Dal, the crew muttered their shock. Jenkum shouted, You'll never take us, which was met with enthusiastic agreement from everyone, except Dal, because he was still thinking about the shuttle's original engine. There was no reason they couldn't go forward with their original plan, to get Murph and to get their original engine. The plan was just going to look a little different now. We'll go, Dal said. Yuichiri broke into a huge smile as the others shouted in disbelief. We can't, Rocktalk cried. We'll never get out of here. You can't be serious, Gwen said in a low voice. Dal? Zero asked, concern shading over their voice. Janka merely released a stream of angry, incomprehensible grumbling. But Dal held firm. He straightened his shoulders and looked Yuichiri right in the eye, keeping his gaze as clear as he could. You're right, he said with a casual, easy smile. We have no way off here, so it looks like we have no choice but to stay. What were you thinking? Gwen hissed, her arms crossed over her chest. We're never getting out of this mess now. Dal looked up at her. They were currently in a small, ramshackle house inside the pod. Dal was certain they had passed by it when they were on their way to meet M. Karja at the pod core. It was hard to believe that it had been only a few hours earlier. Of course, all the doors to the house were locked. The windows were barred. There was no way out. We needed to get to the pod, Dal said. And now we're in the pod. Yes, but we're locked up. Zero came into the little living room where Gwen and Dal were sitting. It's not like they're going to let us even see Murph, much less get close enough to save him. We were planning to come to the pod anyway, Dal said, to trade back for the shuttle's original engine. Now we're just going to have to steal it back. He stood up from the scavenged sofa where he'd been sitting, watching the bustle of the pod through the barred window. We don't even know where it is, Gwen cried. We'll figure something out. Dal studied the window, then rapped on it sharply. Go get Jankum and Rocktalk. We need to figure out a plan. Dal tapped the window again. When Yuichiri locked them in the house, the crew had scattered, dispersing into their own little rooms, everyone too upset with Dal to talk to him. Dal knew they'd get over it, and besides, he'd wanted the time to come up with a plan. He wasn't seeing anything immediately obvious, but he was sure he could figure something out. Dal, Gwen said, you've got to give us something to go on. And we've got to work together. Dal whirled around from the window, fixed his gaze on Gwen and Zero. Yuichiri wasn't going to let us get away. The Chikara were blasting their phasers at Zero, for goodness sake. I was fine, Zero said. My containment suit was able to sustain the blasts, and I'm pretty sure they were set on stun anyway. They didn't even tear through the atmosphere dome. You didn't need to be shot at, Dal said. We needed to get to the pod. We're in the pod. Now we just have to get out of the house. He rapped on the wall, his head tilted. His raps had a kind of hollow, echoing sound to them. These houses can't be that sturdy. They're literally built out of trash. He straightened up. But we do need to hurry. We don't want the Chikara trading our engine before we can steal it back. Dal pulled away from the wall and marched across the living room and into the hallway. He found Rocktalk easily. She was sitting in the closest bedroom, curled up on the floor next to the window. When he stepped inside, she looked over at him, sadness clear in her eyes. Hey, Dal said, I'm calling a group meeting. Rocktalk nodded, but she turned back toward the window without moving to get up. Dal came and perched on the edge of the bed. Everything in the house was shabby and mismatched, scavenged from the endless fields of trash. I know you're still upset. Where do you think they're keeping him? Rocktalk never turned away from the window. Murph? I don't know. Dal rubbed his chin. But we're going to find him. That's what the group meeting is about. I wish we could understand, Murph. Rocktalk reached up and toyed with the comm badge pinned to her shirt. I was thinking, when we get to Earth, maybe Starfleet will be able to figure out a way for the badges to translate him. Dal smiled, even though he felt a twinge of sadness. Earth.
He'd been so focused on getting off the trash pile that he hadn't let himself really think about what was waiting for him when he did. Escape had been enough of a focus. So was getting his crew back together. He just hoped they wouldn't be split apart once they arrived at Starfleet headquarters. It had never occurred to him, though, that Starfleet might be able to understand Murph. And suddenly, going to Earth felt a little less terrible. Maybe, he said. I hope so. So do I. Rocktalk stood up, turning toward Dal. I'm ready for the meeting. Rocktalk still felt sad, her heart twisting up inside her chest every time she thought about Murph and what she had said in the pod core. But coming back to the pod, getting thrown in the house by the guards, it had filled her with a new sense of determination. They were going to get Murph back, and that was what was important. Come on, Dal said. We just need Jankum. Oh, Rocktalk smiled. He's in the kitchen. He's trying to figure out a way to break us out of the house. Dal laughed. Of course he is. He grabbed Rocktalk's hand and squeezed. She smiled, feeling a surge of warmth, of friendship, of family. We're busting out of here, Dal said with a twinkle in his eye. And then we're doing the same thing for Murph. And for the first time in weeks, Rocktalk felt hope. But as it turned out, breaking out of the house was proving harder than it looked. Dal and Rocktalk found Jankum in the kitchen, banging his multi-mid against the window. The window made a sort of dull thudding sound every time he hit it. When they walked in, he turned to face them, groaning. The windows aren't glass. Sweat was already beading across his brow. There's no breaking this. He thumped on the window. What are they made of? Rocktalk walked up beside him, frowning down at the window. Jankum's best guess? Some kind of reinforced Atlantean alloy. Jankum thumped on the window. There's no getting out this way. And we'll need to try something else, Dal said. How about the doors? Can we break them down? And so that was how the team meeting devolved into every single crew member attempting to shatter, pry, bang, and slice their way out of the house. Gwyn and Zero also soon made their way into the kitchen, drawn by the whirring of Jankum's multi-mid as he tried to cut through the lock on the door. Sparks flew everywhere, glinting like sunlight, but Jankum couldn't make any progress. Jankum doesn't know what this metal is, he said, but Jankum wants some. Gwyn tried smashing through the Atlantean alloy window with her heirloom, but only bounced off, much as Jankum's multi-mid did. Rocktalk tried to wrench the door off its hinges. That didn't work either. What about the walls? Dal asked. They seem so flimsy. Something tells me they're stronger than they look, too, Gwyn said wryly. This was proven accurate when she turned her heirloom into a spear and tried to plunge it through the wall's material. It dug in about 2 centimeters and then stayed there. What did they build this house out of? Jankum wailed, slumping down in a rickety chair at the kitchen table. Gwyn yanked hard on her heirloom, eventually working it out of the wall. I think this house is meant to be a prison, she said. I'm not sure we're getting out of... No, Dal said, his voice louder than he intended. We're getting out of here. We have to. Inside, though, he was starting to feel a rumble of panic. Every moment they spent in the house was a moment that the Chikara could be trading the shuttle engine to the Ashari, another moment that they could be taking Murph halfway across the garbage fields to some other pod. But he knew he had to stay calm. He couldn't let the others think they were trapped, even if they were. There's got to be some kind of vent or something, Dal said, somewhere in the house. The others looked over at him dolefully. Zero, maybe you could look for that? Dal gave them a hopeful smile. Maybe you might be able to squeeze through and open the house up from the outside? I can certainly try, Zero said, although they didn't sound entirely convinced. Maybe, Gwyn said, we can split up for a while, see if we can find a way out. Dal nodded. Oh, that's a good idea. What does everyone say? He tried to give them all one of his bright grins, but it felt forced even to him. Rocktalk sighed and looked over at Zero, then Jankum, who was currently studying the hole that Gwyn's heirloom spear made in the wall. I think it's our best bet right now, Dal continued. The faster we can find a way out of here, the better off we'll be. Everyone nodded, then slowly peeled out of the kitchen, everyone except Dal and Jankum.
Dal watched as Jankum pried at the hole with some gleaming metal device from his multi-mitt. He shook his head.
"This is some sturdy stuff,"
he muttered, knocking on the wall. He looked over at Dal.
"Guess you don't have the tricorder, do you?"
"No," Dal said. "We left it on the shuttle."
"Too bad."
Jankum tried another device on his multi-mitt, his brow furrowed in concentration. Dal left him there and made his way to the living room again, hoping to find something he might have missed earlier. He didn't. In fact, it didn't take long for the others to realize they weren't going to find anything either. The only ducts out of the house were about 10 centimeters across, far too small for Zero. Every window was made of the same alloy as the ones in the kitchen. None of the locks could be broken, and so the crew made their way back to the living room in defeat. They found Dal waiting for them on the couch, slumped down, one arm thrown over his eyes, and one by one they all announced the same thing. Nothing. There was no way to get out of the house.
"So now what?"
Jankum asked. And Dal didn't have an answer.